think that's pretty much everything. For those of you that are new to PROergonomics, welcome. We're always glad to see new faces or hear new faces. And for those of you that are returning, also very glad to have your continued support. We are a ergonomics health and safety consulting service firm, and we have great records on helping all of our clients kind of reach their ergonomic goals, whether that be kind of more reactive and trying to get a handle on their injury management and their claims, or kind of moving into really more proactive risk assessment, or even the hyper proactive, which is kind of getting into design reviews, all very kind of high-end services. So if you have any questions or concerns with your ergonomics at your workplace, please give us a call. We are always willing and able to help. All right, so I always find the first slide is a bit tentative on getting it to move, so we shall see how this goes. See, so far, a bit of a delay. There we go. So as I said, my name is Alex Stinson. I will be your PROergonomics expert today, and we will be talking about kind of being your ergonomic detective and really looking at basically accident investigation and how does that change, or does it change, when it comes to musculoskeletal disorder type injuries. So our kind of agenda for the day will be kind of asking the question, why are accident investigations so challenging when it comes to MSDs? I always ask the question, are you even doing them? I know a lot of my clients, when it comes to kind of the accident investigation, like we fill out the form, we go through the steps, but when it comes to kind of a full-blown investigation, maybe some of our efforts fall a little shy simply because we don't really know what to do with them. We don't know where to go. They're hard enough to control, you know, on the outset. So on the inset, it's just sometimes challenging. Looking at your standardized form, is that even giving you the support you need to perform an investigation when it is an MSD? And then kind of getting into that root cause analysis. And we'll be going through an example just to kind of cover off how, let's say, I would envision your process to go if you were doing an accident investigation or root cause analysis for an MSD. So without further ado, we're going to jump in, talking about kind of that whole just gray area. You know, as an ergonomist, being in ergonomics, we say frequently, this is a gray science, and it's because we can't give you black and white answers a lot of the time, unfortunately. So we have different issues that kind of keep on coming up. First off, kind of going through some of the list is, you know, the simple questions, you know, the when and where. Can you answer those? Because I can't, and this is my job. So looking at the when and where, I don't have a time, I don't have a date, I don't have a location. So right there, if you're using a standardized form, you know, those are questions that we're already feeling not necessarily overwhelmed, but ambivalent in. So that whole gradual onset, the fact that, you know, it's not just one thing that's going to make or break an MSD. It's going to be multiples of things. So we have that as being one factor. We have that whole, because it is gradual onset, employees may not realize that this is maybe a work-related issue. They may think it's because, oh, well, I was stacking wood one day, so, you know, it's because of that day. Meanwhile, it may have more long-term consequences or beginnings. The how it happened, yeah. So you may have a job that's, you know, fairly maybe light or sedentary, in which case, you know, muscle strain or stress or chronic discomfort, you know, becomes a little bit more apparent. But if you are in a position where your job is fairly active, very potentially I don't want to say heavy, but requires a lot of movement and maybe not the best postures, and there is going to be some weight and force involved, then how it happens becomes very challenging, because there are lots of things that we do with our bodies, and sometimes it could be work related, sometimes it could be our extracurriculars at home, sometimes it could just be how we sleep. So it's definitely not clear as to what our contributing factors are. We also have challenges sometimes, I mean, not so much in the accident investigation, but with the whole claim in itself is, the WSIB determination. That can be a very long process for some of us, or it may go through different stages of appeal. And then we have just the fact that our accident investigations are, I have here hard, and I do believe they're hard. I believe that they are difficult and challenging to do, but I also believe that the tools we have and the way we are trained on accident investigation isn't necessarily supporting us in doing the same process with an MSD, because we can't fill out the box the same, and how we do fill out the box, we're kind of adapting and morphing to try and make sense of what we have in the information that we have to put in them. So, things like what are our activities at home and play and sleep, those things don't come up into an accident investigation typically, but they may be factors here in our accident investigation that we have to do because this is musculo-related. So what's the end result when we have an accident investigation that maybe isn't supporting the process, isn't supporting us, and doesn't lead us down the path that we need to go? Well, we often get the wrong control, right? So we have maybe less of our boxes filled out, we have less information available to us, and therefore we have a tendency to lead down the path of more of an administrative control, which we know typically is not the hardest hitting control that we have. So that control may not address the root cause. In fact, administrative ones typically don't address the root cause. They usually just kind of support a more, engineering type control. Or worse, we don't have a control at all, and we just kind of say, oh, well, we're just going to retrain, or it was employee error, so on and so forth. So without going through the process and finding actually what the root cause is, it becomes challenging to know what we need to do. And when we get into that loop and we have MSDs coming up again and again, and our claims are going higher and higher, and the expectation is, you as health and safety professionals or human resources professionals or return to work professionals, it's your job to bring these numbers down. This is a system that typically fails us. So how do we take this gray area and turn it into black and white? The first thing I would encourage you to do, challenge you to do, would be to maybe go through and look at your accident investigation form. Kind of just highlight the spots that you think are going to either not allow you to dig deep enough or not asking the right questions, is a question you can't answer. Maybe you decide to create a secondary form that's going to be specifically for MSDs, that's going to allow the investigation process to be a little smoother, to be standardized for sure, because you may not be the only one doing the accident investigations, and therefore also will then lead into just a better process, and you can then improve your training when you do accident investigations, because it is a little bit different. Yes, there's similarities, but at the end of the day, you definitely leave your accident investigation feeling a little more kind of head scratching and, I wonder if I hit the right point, as you go through. So typical root cause analysis process is generally what we're going to be looking at. And how can we take this process that we all know and maybe love and turn it into something that we can see how ergonomic factors kind of factor into this. So defining the problem will be your injury. We have an injury, what does that look like? Obviously going in, doing your data collection. This is something that we do for more health and safety related injuries and accident investigations. So it just may be a little bit more, it may be more in depth in some cases, it may be less in depth than others, depending, if you're looking at a critical injury, then obviously that's going to be a very, very in-depth investigation as opposed to, maybe a paper cut. So not to demean the paper cuts because, we all get them, but your data collection should be appropriate to what it is you're looking for. Then looking at our causal factors. So our causal factors, I think, are the things that we do well in accident investigation as a whole. But specifically when it comes to our MSDs, we are fairly good at understanding what our MSD hazards are. And the nice thing, and just as a forewarning, I actually am not going to have a slide on the MSD hazards. So if that's something that's new to you and you need to be informed on those, either give us a call or go back through some of our other webinars, and we have lots that touch on the MSD hazards. But the nice thing with MSD hazards are they're the same 7 every time. So I'll just touch on them briefly, but as I said, there won't be a slide. We have force, we have repetition, we have awkward posture, we have static posture, we have contact stress, we have vibration, and we have cold. Okay, so the nice thing is all of our causal factors, those 7 ones, we could even put into a form and give them each their own moment to have kind of some notes or comments or something written about them. But there's all of, those 7 are the key main factors for most MSD injuries. So by capturing those 7 causal factors, you're already digging down to a level that may take a lot longer if it was a health and safety investigation more than an MSD investigation or an ergonomic one. But the question is how do we take those MSD hazards that we probably already know? That part is actually going to be, I think, probably our easiest part of this process, but find out what the root cause is, because the root cause is going to allow us to implement the right control. And I think you're going to hear me say the right control a number of times today. So the first thing, as I said, we need to define the problem. What was the injury? So although our hazards, as I mentioned just now, are all kind of the same, the area of the injury can narrow your scope of investigation. If you're looking at shoulder, then potentially, not necessarily, but potentially we don't need to look at things that are, on the ground or low levels. Maybe we're looking at high level things, work that's being done above shoulder height, work that's being done kind of with extended reaches, that type of thing. But you can start to minimize all the measurements that you need to take. So definitely focusing and kind of setting yourself up by understanding the injury that you're looking at. If you're looking at hand, finger versus shoulder versus back, well, that investigation is going to take a different tone. And understanding that tone is going to make the process smoother. Oh, I see I'm losing some words there. I apologize for that. And the reason that's important to kind of narrow that scope is because when you do an accident investigation for an ergonomic issue or an MSD, you're going to find that you see lots of areas of improvement, lots of areas that are going to be jumping out at you. You're going to have things that are going to have high forces, or things that are going to be heavy, or just things in awkward places that we can't reach or access very easily. So it may be easy to kind of get lost in the details because there is so much opportunity for improvement in general. But the question is that improvement, but does it belong in this step specifically? Because if it's not going to minimize, reduce, or eliminate that injury in the future, then we're getting overwhelmed. So always kind of make sure that we're always focusing on the injury, on the issue, so that when those other things kind of pop up, because employees, as soon as you get into the interview process, they're going to want to tell you other issues that they're having, other concerns that they have, but we need to kind of keep on track and say, no, we're here, we're looking for shoulder. And shoulder is kind of what we're focusing on today. But, use the Joint Health and Safety Committee, come talk to me after this, and we can discuss some of the other concerns so that you can have more of a proactive program going on the side, and we're not always just kind of doing our accident investigations and our reactive program. So I mentioned data collection. Question, do you have a kit for your accident investigations? And if so, what does it have in it? For ergonomics, your kit could be quite minimal, nice and tidy, fits in your pocket kind of thing. Tape measure is going to be key. I'll say that first off. So definitely run out and find yourself a tape measure, because heights and reaches, that's all going to come into play. It's also a good thing to have when you start getting into your return to work program, when we get things saying no working above shoulder height for a person with shoulder injury, but that person is 6'4" and there is no above shoulder work, you need to know what that person's shoulder height is in order to be able to say conclusively, no, we don't have any above shoulder work that we have to accommodate for. So things like that, that tape measure comes in handy for lots and lots of things. Your heights and your reaches. If you don't have a scale that's readily available to you, most of my manufacturing clients, there's a scale on the plant floor somewhere. Shipping usually is a good place to go. But if you are more, maybe hospitals have scales too, they just may not be as readily available, but healthcare, administrative in nature, municipalities, again, those things may not be available, then maybe a scale is also something you want to keep in your kit. A force gauge is nice, but it is usually going to collect something that's more high end. So, we carry around force gauges. So often when we get poor data collection, it's what's leading to ineffective controls, and it leads to subjective information, which you may think, oh, that looks really heavy, or that looks really light, when in actual fact, it's the opposite. So if you get focused on the fact that, oh, well, that looks really heavy, or someone gave you a measurement that I think it's 25 pounds, I've learned a long time ago, for the safety of my back, not to just ask people how much it weighs, because if I go to try and lift it and they've said, oh no, it's like 15 pounds and it's 45, that's a problem for me. So getting your data collection down can really start to draw out the picture without some of the emotional data kind of being in there, and it becomes a little bit more black and white. If we're talking about reaches, how far of a reach? Does that reach, is it causing, awkward postures at the shoulder, or is it causing us to reach for the shoulder and then lean in with the back? That's important. Same thing with your working heights, and your repetition is another one. So your phone is excellent. Taking video so that you can go back and figure out, how many times are they doing this in a cycle, can be really key and really helpful. So get yourself a kit if you don't already have one. As I said, tape measure fits nicely in your desk. So, and your phone is usually always attached to us in some way, shape, or form. So you'll have a stopwatch, you'll have a camera, you'll have a video camera, and you will have a measuring tape in your desk. So we should be pretty much set for a lot of the information that we need to capture. The other part that we need to do is the interview process. Now, the interview process is nothing new to us. It is something that we've been doing with our health and safety type injuries from the get-go. So how does it change when it comes to your MSDs? First off, of course, we talk to our injured worker. Bringing them into the fold is key, and getting their information and their take on what were their challenges, where are they having issues. At the end of the day, the accident investigation, we may find that we actually don't have any root cause issues here. Some of the root cause, they may be outside of work. However, it does not to say that you're not going to have factors that are going to irritate or aggravate an injury that's already present. So get all that information in your interview with the employee. You also may want to talk to other employees, typically ones that or maybe the opposite of the injured employee. So if you're talking with someone short, or you want to talk with someone tall, if you're talking with a male, you may want to talk with a female, just so that you can get a bit of scope to understand not just what the root cause with this injury is, but if this is more widespread. If more people are potentially walking down the road towards an injury, and again, I'm kind of starting to layer in a proactive approach, but you're there doing it now. It's going to give you more information. It's also going to give you an idea, and this is really key, on how different people work, because the work method piece to all of this really does come into play. You may find that people are doing unnecessary steps. You may find that people are staging things and adding extra handling in. They may have just really bad work methods where their body's being turned into pretzels. If you just interview the injured worker here, we're going to lose out on that. So again, we're used to interviewing multiple people during an accident investigation, but understand the purpose of it isn't necessarily to, it's maybe not the same as your health and safety investigation, where we're trying to get an account of the events, because as I said earlier, we don't really have a great account of the events, even from the injured worker, because of the gray matter. We don't know the when, we don't know the where, we don't know the how. So we're really trying to just figure out maybe where some of the differences are and how that person works compared to other people. How does the job look differently for them? And then going back and clarifying information with your foreman, your lead hands, your supervisors, because often what we'll find when we're talking to employees, I find this all the time when I do my interviewing process, is there is a very strict sense of what the production criteria is from our employee staff. And they will often, I have found, work well above what the supervisor or manager actually expects them to. But in their head, they're like, no, I have to do this. Like, I have to get, this done by the end of the day. I have to get, this many parts made. I have to, whatever their impression is. But when we actually start talking to the foreman or the lead hands, they're like, no, like if that runs over, into the next day or even a week after that, that's not an issue. Or, we should be able to schedule this so that, they shouldn't be doing these two tasks side by side. So you kind of get my point that often the way the employee perceives their work and the way that the foreman or lead hand manages the work, they can be two totally different things, specifically when it comes to production rates, frequencies, repetition, all of those types of things. So definitely include them in the process, because they're going to be very key in kind of just clarifying that whole situation for you. So now we get into the causal factors. So again, I don't think this is anything new. These are the same factors that we probably look at when we're doing health and safety. So let's take them and move with them when we're doing our MSD investigation as well. What materials, what materials are involved? What processes are being required? What is the environment that they're working in? What equipment are they using and what's the management and how many staff, or what's the people factor of the whole issue? What we'll often find is sometimes, for instance, force is one that will often get pegged as being the big issue. And for some of us, force is also the hardest one to reduce. The product weighs, what the product weighs, I can't really do anything about that. Pothole patching, which is going to be the example that we're going through, I may not be able to, that's what it weighs. So I don't necessarily have an answer to the weight question necessarily at this moment without going through my accident investigation further. But what I find is, because force is such a big hitter, we definitely focus on it, as we should, but it may not be the root cause. So we can kind of get down and miss what the hazard and the causal factors that are going together are actually kind of portraying in this scenario. So remembering our materials, process, environments, equipment, management, and people, and then we're going to start categorizing our data collection information into those categories. So when we get into our root cause, there are lots of different methods. Sorry, I will click through that a little bit fast. There's lots of different methods. There's your 5 whys, your step analysis. There's what we have right here, which is our fishbone. I think this is one of the most commonly used based on the work that I've done with various companies, as well as the training I've done. The fishbone model is definitely one that I think people are fairly familiar with. So this is the one we're going to work with today. So we have hazard here, but let's start this not with hazard, but with MSD. So we have the MSD, we've done our data collection, we've talked to the employee, we've talked to other employees, we've talked to the supervisors. The supervisor is going to be able to give us lots of information that's going to be process related, potentially equipment, material related, definitely management related. And your other employees are going to give you, again, insight on the process. They're going to give you insight on the people component, as well as they're going to have things to say about the equipment. So, and materials. So definitely we're going to have these laid out, and it helps us kind of put things into appropriate information. So I do up one of these so that I can just bullet point kind of everything and do it this way. So whichever way you prefer, but however you're going to gather your data. So when we go through this, you know, our environment's going to have lighting, temperature, what's your terrain, are you working at heights, your process, that's where your standard operating procedures come in. What are your training methods to some degree, your frequencies, your durations, your repetitions, your postures. A lot of your MSD hazard quantifiers are going to come in your process. Your force is definitely going to come into your materials. So is that going to come into your equipment and tools. So what are the weights? What are the forces? Is there vibration? Is there contact stress? All of those things. Is the tool an assistive tool? Is it going to actually reduce some of the MSD hazards that people are being exposed to while doing the task? Those are also key. And the next question for me would be, were those assistive tools or aids, were they being used? Because maybe, again, the injury would not have happened if the assistive tools weren't being used. And one of the main excuses, I'll say excuses, I'm going to be blunt about that, is that employees often have, again, that misconception that they think they don't have the time to use the assistive aid because it'll slow them down. But again, if your supervisor, if your management staff are on board with this and they're willing to give the employee the time, then that's usually one of the huge disconnects we find, where production expectations of the employees and production expectations of the organization are different. And definitely a huge area for potential injury if those assistive devices that you guys have paid money for and put in are not being used. So your people, they could be potentially personal factors towards the employee, definitely, you know, their height, their stature, their age, those things that we cannot do anything about, but are definitely going to come in there as under people. But they may also be more operational. You may have the number of workers, what the employee's work method is. Does it contradict or correspond with how you want the employees to be working, what the SOPs and the work method training are showing? Is the worker seasonal, temporary, permanent, full-time? All of those things kind of come into play. And then lastly, your management, which is looking at, and for some reason management's not coming up, so I'm not sure what's going on there. But that's going to be, oh, there we go. Your supervision. Sometimes your psychosocial factors are going to come in here. Does the supervisor and the employee have a good working relationship? Do they have a bad working relationship? Do the employees have a good working relationship? Do they have a bad working relationship? We know, studies have shown us that in the event where relationships are positive, employees actually are less likely to report an injury, for good or bad, you know, and vice versa. If they have poor relationships in the workplace, then they are more likely. And that may be the issue that you're dealing with. Your root cause may be a cultural morale one with the employee that's, you know, going to be a very different implementing of control process than, let's say, some of the more physical factors here. Is there overtime? Is there breaks? What were their training schedules like? Have they been taught to use the equipment? All of those things kind of come in place. And those are the things you want to kind of dig down and drill down and kind of bring to the surface so that we can then look through and see what this looks like. So as I said, we're going to do a sample investigation. For some of you, specifically our municipalities, you may have gone through this process already. So if you're here and you've done this, you can either join us again or you have maybe a 5-minute period where you can check your email. But the sample investigation activity is going to be pothole patching. So the employee has a right shoulder injury. So that should tell you something right off the bat. So something, it's going the right shoulder, but not the left. So it's not a bilateral activity. Or the way the work method is, the work method's requiring more of the right shoulder than it is the left. It should also start the questioning of what measurements I need to take for a shoulder injury. The description of the task is, as I said, it's pothole patching. The hours are 10-hour days. They do it 2 to 3 times a week, and it's seasonal. They don't typically do as much of it in the winter time. So that's basically all we know once the person kind of puts the claim in, and that's the injury, the investigation or the report in that we're going to do. And now we have to figure out more information on that. So what does that look like? So as we go through our fishbone causal factors, first off, the environment. There's outside conditions that may not be pleasant. We may have rain, we may have sleet, we may have hot temperatures, which may come with different issues. We have the whole temperature factor when we talk about one of the hazards being cold. Definitely that may come into place. Our terrain may be rough, it may be imbalanced, and we may not have the best lighting. We may be working, day versus night or summer versus fall, where our daylighting hours are less, shall we say, as we're getting into that season right now. As we go through our process, we're going to want to find out information on what's the operating procedure for loading, what's the operating procedure for patching, what's our we have 10-hour days. What's our operating procedure for tamping? Is there tamping? From the experience that we have doing pothole patching in, assessments, there's some people that are like, no, we don't even carry around a tamper. We just use the wheels of our car and drive over it. And then you have other organizations that are like, no, we use a tamper. So how much repetition is that? How many loads are required per pothole? How many potholes are they doing a day? All of these things kind of come out during your process investigation on that causal factor. And then we can get into your materials. For instance, I say for instance, but nothing's happening. Did you know that there are a variety of different pothole patch mixes? There's ones that have more asphalt, ones that have more stone, ones that have more tar. And because of that, they're going to come with a different level of exertion, shall I say? And so that may be a contributing factor that comes into play. What mixture were they using when they felt like the injury was becoming prevalent? So that's basically all the materials we have for pothole patching. But then we have our equipment. We have the dump truck. So just take a second. What kind of information are you going to want to take on the dump truck? So we know it's a shoulder injury, so this is where we're going to need our kit. We've already had maybe our scale out for our materials, but I'm definitely going to be interested in how tall that tailgate is, or where we're getting the pothole mix from. What kind of reach is involved? What is our shovel size, the shovel weight? Is there a different design? Same kind of things with the tamper. Do we even have a tamper? So all of these things kind of are coming in, and these ones are requiring, this is where you can take just general information and start putting in and depositing your objective information. So taking, for instance, just these bullet points, but adding weights, reaches, all of those things that we're going to need for the MSD hazard investigation. When we get into people, again, looking at the different statures, the different, to say that, oh, well, the tailgate height isn't high, but we have a 5-foot person saying that their shoulders are sore, well, that definitely makes sense. So understanding that, was there one person, was there two, is there a different method, were they using the right method? And then lastly, we have our management style and getting into the fact of where's our supervision, our scheduling, our training, what was the preventive maintenance like on some of the equipment and tools that we're using, and so on and so forth. So you can start to see this isn't much different than health and safety investigation. The thing that I'm most stressing is that most of us, at least in my experience from the clients that I've worked with, do not go into this detail when we're discussing MSD injuries. We don't necessarily dig down as deep as all of this for some of these injuries. Okay. So when we start to pop that in to our fishbone diagram, just to kind of see what that looks like. So I kind of popped in some here. So we have the environment, we have the outside, we have the cold temperatures, we have the equipment, we have the tamper, the shovel, the truck, we have the processing of loading and patching, and the fact that it's going on for 10 hours. I've just put one or two persons. I haven't put any personal factors in under the person. And now we can start just trying to attribute where our hazards are lying. So this is kind of where it's a little bit different from, well, maybe it's not. I don't know, I always feel like it feels like it's a little bit different. Maybe it's because my hazards are so finite in MSD investigations because I only have the 7. So when I'm looking at, I start to put them in. So outside, what hazards do I have there? Well, I'm going to have, and again, temp, there we go, I'm going to have cold. But my process is going to have repetition, it's going to have force, it's going to, contact stress, it's going to have force, and it's going to have awkward posture. My materials are going to have force. My equipment, potentially force. I think potentially awkward posture could go in equipment too. If I have one person versus 2, that's going to impact my repetition. And same with scheduling and supervision. I may be, overtime, that type of thing, scheduling back-to-back days in pothole patching rather than, every other day. All of that's going to increase my exposure as well. So one thing that starts to kind of become apparent is the fact that a couple of our MSD hazards are showing up numerous times. So depending on when this came out, maybe let's put a little bit more detail into this accident investigation. You got it now. You got the report now that, your employee was out doing something outside. It doesn't have to be pothole patching in this instance. It could be anything. But their outside element, the injury happened then. Okay. It would be very easy to fall on the fact that we are now going through a temperature change, and the changing factor here is the cold. And if we were just to kind of be like, and the employee may actually report those words to you. Oh, I think it's because it's getting cold out. And that's why, I'm starting to have shoulder pains. And that may definitely be an issue. But when we look at our causal or contributing factors, we see that cold really is only coming up once in all of this investigation. So although it's a factor, and because we know MSDs are cumulative, we know that, one day of cold is not going to cause an MSD. It's going to be multiple weeks and whatnot that are going to cause an MSD. So it's more likely that, yes, cold may have been the straw that broke the camel's back, but by looking at this, we see that the repetition and the force are definitely ones that come into play as being 2 of the biggest hazards that we need to try and control for. So giving the person a coat, although it may be nice and, giving some thermal wear may be nice and may help them feel more comfortable, at the end of the day, the stress and strain that potentially caused that shoulder injury is still present. We have done nothing to the weight, the force, or the repetition. So again, going back to that right control. Did we get the right control because we controlled for cold? Chances are no. So that's when we can kind of go through the what if game. So once we have all of this and you have all your hazards kind of stuck on your sheet, just like I did, at least mentally anyways, you don't have to do it physically, you start asking the question, would this injury have happened if it was warmer? And if you say, yeah, it definitely could, then that is not your root cause. Would it have happened if the weight was lower? Well, no, yeah, it probably could because of the repetition factor. Would it have happened if it had only happened once, if it was less repetitive? Well, no, it wouldn't have happened then. So you can kind of start to see that you start asking some of these questions and it becomes apparent whether or not what is the hazard that you need to control for. So although weight and repetition were the 2 highest, we may be able to say that, no, you know what, if it was 5 pounds lower, that still probably would have caused an injury because they have to do so many potholes or the repetition in the task is so high. Would it have happened if the duration was less, if they only did it for 2 hours a day rather than 10 hours a day? Okay, that definitely is a possibility too. It may not have happened then as well. So when we start looking at some of what we have to do, this is where we can be challenged. This is also a really good process because it also lets you know, for instance, repetition is probably the hardest hazard to control for. We're not in kind of the business of not making things, of not producing, of not getting things done. So when we start to say less repetition, we're also saying less productivity in some cases, unless there is a work method attributed there where the repetition is increasing. So we need to start to kind of think, if that's what our root cause is repetition, and we know we can't do anything about it, well, then maybe this is how I now need to go back. Okay, what was the next one? The next one was weight. Well, how can I maybe look at that and see if I can at least make the repetition better by reducing some of the other factors? For instance, if I could make the postures better and they still had to do it repetitively, would that make a difference? Absolutely, it would. Absolutely. Anyone who's worked in an office on a computer knows they can type super, super fast and probably can do that without injury if they have a good ergonomic setup. But as soon as you start to put poor posture in with that typing task, now all of a sudden we start having wrist, we start having shoulder, we start having kind of MSD related issues. Sorry, I'm not sure where that slide comes from. So either way, we're going to pass by that one. We're going to go into our identifying controls. So not a new slide again. This is full out, right out of your safety 101, your elimination, your substitution, your engineering, administrative, your PPE. So in this case, PPE definitely for your thermals, that type of thing. We're not talking bracing or supports in this case because that's going to be a short-term fix that we don't necessarily want to start that path because it becomes very political very quickly. Just my footnote and opinion on those. But definitely when you're looking at your administrative, engineering, elimination, substitution, and elimination controls, you may not have one. You may have a variety of these that are going to help support each other. For instance, if you're going to provide a different piece of equipment to do the task, then you should also provide a training program that supports that. Because if there's a will, there's a way. People often will find a quicker, faster, not more effective way of doing things that will potentially increase their chance of an MSD because no one taught them how to use it properly. Your office chair is the prime example. The number of times, and I can almost say almost every time I do an office assessment, the words, "Oh, I didn't know it did that," comes out of someone's mouth. So, and it's not mine, because I did know. So, you know, that's kind of an example of maybe something was provided. You provided someone a great chair because they were having back issues, but we didn't provide the education or the training in order for them to be able to use that tool effectively to be able to minimize their chance of injury. And anyone who's been following us has probably seen this slide, I don't know, I want to say 100 times, but I would be happy if I said 200 because I really believe this is kind of the slide that speaks to your participatory ergonomics and that, you know, you don't necessarily have to sit there and bang your head against the brick wall for answers. There's people that know kind of what path you should start going down, and they're often the employees themselves. So asking the employee that is injured, asking their coworkers, you know, and you don't have to be specific, you know, what can we do to fix Alex's shoulder injury, but, you know, we're concerned about shoulders. What do you think is going to help make this job easier? The preconception that we're going to ask for the world's best and greatest and most expensive tools and equipment is, in my experience, wrong. I usually find the keep it simple, stupid solutions are what I see most. Really simple, really effective, really, you know, practical, and we can get them in quickly. Those are usually the solutions we have coming out of our staff. And that's why we have the duct tape solution. We call it, you know, if you've seen your employees have duct taped something together and finagled some contraption, you know, if it's old and beat up and looking like it's been there a while, then you should be really happy and try and make that more of a permanent solution because they're doing something that's working for them. And it's working for others too, because it's not being torn down. It's getting to the point where it gets to look old and ragged. So we call those our duct tape solutions, and we should always be looking for those because they really are usually our most effective solutions to implementing hazard control. So we still have to accommodate. We do have to put a solution in. Training, although that should be one, it's probably not the only solution we should have. However, when I see MSD investigations, typically what I will see is that being the big one is we're going to retrain. So But try and have your short-term and long-term goals. We understand that some of these things are not going to happen. If we're talking about our pothole patcher and we're looking at trying to provide a new truck, well, that has to go through budget and go through council, and that is going not to happen this year. Just flat out, we know it's not going to happen. So what are we going to do in the interim? What are we going to do to try and make this A, something that we can accommodate into, and B, we can try and mitigate the injuries before we get to our long-term root cause control. In that case, we also need to make changes to the training, to our operating procedures. Usually when we get into these, a lot of good information. So when we start talking to other employees, we start to find out, oh, well, the operating procedure says this, but I do it this way because it's a lot easier. Yeah, we want to put that in the operating procedure. If it's making things easier for people, we want everyone doing it that way. So again, accident investigation is not fun, regardless of whether it's MSD or health and safety type injuries. But if we do it appropriately, I find that we'll definitely get, from an MSD perspective anyways, opportunities to start moving our program into that more of a proactive realm where things are starting to kind of be a bit more just easier. Let's just say easier. And then if you're coming up with new training or coming up with new operating procedures, education on that. How are we kind of increasing the employees' awareness to the fact that, hey, this is something that you guys came up with, and giving that community support back to the employees so that they feel engaged in the process. And they're going to want to answer your questions next time, because you know what? Last time, Tony got a pat on the back because he changed the new operating procedures so that it was less repetitive and it was easier on people. All great things. And this is one of the things that I think is absolutely key. If you've got to the point where you feel like you are actually, the root cause is clear, defined, whether it be because it's obvious or whether it be because you've done a very in-depth accident investigation. But when we know that the root cause is the root cause, then we don't want to just do it for that one employee. We need to make that global. We need to make that a corporate initiative and make that accessible to all of our staff, so that, again, we're not constantly fighting these injuries that keep cropping up, because the controls that we're doing for one person, you know, whether it be a chair that you bought for someone or whether it be a new shovel for our pothole patchers, whichever the initiative was, that it's not just, you know, Sally's chair and Sally gets to put her name on it and she takes it with her from workstation to workstation, but maybe we need to, in a long-term scope of things, do an audit of our chairs and see that everyone has a chair that is appropriate for them, that fits them, that has the features that's going to help minimize their chance of injury. But if you need to know that it's the root cause, because making something a global initiative, if it's something about changing the operating procedure, then it may not cost any money. But if it's something like bringing in new chairs, that is going to cost money. So we need to know that this is going to be impactful. We need to know that this is the right control for minimizing that injury, because otherwise we're going to lose faith in our program. And if we lose faith in our program, then everything kind of starts to fall away. So that is pretty much it for me. I think I have some questions, so just give me a second. Maybe not. Not very good at. Oh, nope, just yes. So as someone had asked if it will be uploaded, as I said in the beginning, if you missed that, yes, all of our webinars will be recorded and are going to be uploaded, and that'll be addressed. You'll get a notification when it is. So if you enjoyed listening to me, you can join me next month, because I will be your webinar host that month too, and we're going to be talking about just one specific MSD hazard, and that's cold, and talking about how we can potentially look at battling some of the effects and what kind of controls we can do to minimize the effects of cold to MSDs when we don't really have options. If your employees are working refrigerators or working outside, how can we kind of work around that? Just as a note for you, this is a hot topic, so it is not a full hour-long presentation, it is only half hour. So, all right, that is it for me. If anyone has any questions, I will stay on for a few more minutes. But other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future. Everyone be safe, and we'll see you soon.